Leigh Marie, are you there? Can you hear me? How you doing?
Oh, what's up, Coogan? How's it going?
It's good. What's new with you? I'd love to get your initial take on AI week. We got Microsoft Build, Google I/O, OpenAI I/O. We got Claude 4 from Anthropic. It's been a massive week. What has stuck out to you as like the most interesting, the most underrated, the most worth digging into of the news of the week?
Well, I guess just to start off, and it's so good to see you again. It's been a
Yeah,
while.
it's been too long.
So yeah, thanks for having me on the show. Yeah, it's no, there's never a dull moment, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like every day there's something really significant that you need to be paying attention to if you're going to try to make money investing in AI companies.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I mean, I think the big thing actually there's so much this week. I mean,
Right.
starting with some of the stuff you said, the
It's the
IO.
best time to be a technology podcaster.
Yeah,
Investors a
yeah.
close second, but podcasters really where you want to be. That's where the action is because every day there's new news. Anyway, yeah. What is sticking out to you?
Hey, Jordy.
Hey,
Yeah. So
sorry.
so there's the IO acquisition in particular. That
Yeah.
news. What an incredible video. What an incredible team. I mean, just really showcasing OpenAI's ambition to really get into a lot of stuff. And I mean, obviously, there's a lot of speculation about what the device will look like. I was actually looking
My
this up.
favorite, sorry to interrupt. My favorite part was John and I are, I guess, ex-hall monitors. We're in the community notes program.
Oh
And
yeah.
so somebody was trying to community note the OpenAI launch video. And the suggested community note was, this video uses AI. These two scenes aren't real. If you look at this section, it's like, you're trying to gotcha an AI company for using AI in a marketing video? Like, what is this?
It's very funny.
That's very silly.
What do you expect?
Yeah.
They don't
That's
use
kind of the
little
point.
AI.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. I mean, super excited about what potentially that could imply for just OpenAI's ambitions, especially as it relates to consumer hardware. I was
Yeah.
looking it up on O3, but O3 kept then kind of giving me some different answers. But it might be, and to be fair, I don't kind of know the current state of things inside of IO,
Yeah.
Johnny Ive's company, but it might be one of the largest, if not the largest, sort of pre-product acquisition of all time.
Yeah.
So,
I think so.
I mean, $6.5 billion is a lot of money.
Yeah, we've been noodling
It's a
on
couple
it because
points. It's a couple points for a key exec.
Exactly, it's 2% of the company. Which, when you think about bringing in an executive at that level, that like comp for that
Industry
team,
legend.
it's not that crazy to get to that number. And then today in the Wall Street Journal, Sam Altman is quoted saying that if they can nail it and get a major consumer device, that's $1 trillion opportunity. And that sounds crazy. But you look at Apple's market cap, you look at Android, Samsung, like yeah, there probably is $1 trillion in market cap.
Well, there was also the tinfoil hat saying like, oh, he's trying to dilute the
that whole
nonprofit. And it's
thing.
like, that they're issuing billions of dollars of stock to employees all the
That's
time.
happening a
right?
lot. Yeah.
Like, this is not some
Who knows?
crazy conspiracy.
I do want to get your take on the actual device. We've seen some pre-render, some AI images around like a pendant with a camera on it, the Her model, maybe it's an earpiece. I imagine you get pitched a lot of AI devices. We've seen the Rabbit, the Humane, the Friend. Are there any other ideas that you've seen that could potentially be just AI devices, even not from OpenAI, but just in general? Because Apple's got it pretty well covered. They got your ears, they got your eyes with the Vision Pro, they got your phone, the watch, the iPad, the laptop, the desktop. Like there's not a lot of white space in the Apple catalog, but it'll be interesting to see if somebody can come up with something that's new. Have you seen anything that's interesting?
Oh man, I really wish I could tell you about it, but yeah, we actually have a company in stealth,
Let's
so I can't say
go.
much. But there's
Okay.
certainly different,
Have them come on the
modalities.
show when they're ready.
Yeah, I'll be super excited too.
Okay,
But
cool.
people are being really creative,
Yeah.
and then also, I mean, just generally, and I'm sure you're seeing this too, just given like the pace of how much is happening, and then also the competitive nature of these markets. Like it's
Yep.
clear that there's this big prize, maybe bigger than ever before.
Yep.
And so if you've got a really good idea, like, and if you don't have trouble raising funding, getting customers or hiring people,
Mhm.
like, why talk about it too soon? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll be excited to share more on that.
Yeah, there's
But
also, I
so much
feel
cool
like
stuff.
people have just been generally willing to fund hardware, but
Yeah.
also kind of categorically bearish, right? People are just like, oh, like hardware is really hard. Like I'm going to make this
Well,
bet, but like it's
the
really
meme
hard. But then you
hardware
have,
is hard
but then you
used
have-
to be about supply chain.
Yeah.
It used to be about all the things that can go wrong.
then also
and,
look at-
and the
look at-
working capital. And
we're
the
at a point where
CapEx.
like Aura and Whoop
Yeah.
are like big
Totally.
businesses that I don't know.
Yeah.
Like ultra specifics on either, but I
Yeah.
bet that Aura will be a really big company
Yeah.
in 10
From
years.
my perspective, it's almost harder. It's not, it is hard to make the device and manufacture it and deal with the fact that 90% of your revenue comes in Christmas. But like the real hard part is actually changing consumer behavior and getting someone to take off their Apple Watch or add a Whoop band to the other wrist, which is, I think, the predominant pattern for most Whoop users. But, what are you looking for in hardware startups that you're looking at? What are the pitfalls that you want to see founding teams overcome before potentially backing them?
Yeah, so I'll say I don't have a massive background in hardware. I mean, I
Yeah.
will say I was at Scale, I was
Yeah.
relatively early there, for and was an engineer there for 4 years and then a PM. And we worked with a lot of hardware companies there.
Sure.
So I mean, the main customer of Scale back in the very early days was self-driving car companies,
Yeah.
and robotics companies.
Yeah.
And so I have seen just through working with them as customers, some potential pitfalls. And I mean, the quip is that hardware is hard.
Yeah.
That you've got all of the challenges of building a company, and then you've also got to just manage supply chains, and you have to be a lot more careful about, the economics. Software is usually relatively high margin, or it's easier to make it high margin. Hardware, obviously much harder when you've got to figure out where all these materials are coming from and ramping up. So even if you have demand, like ramping up in a sort of scalable way, and then also implementation can generally just take a really long time.
And it distributes at the speed of the internet. Like you can go viral and get 100 million people on a website in a day. You just can't ship 100 million things anywhere in any reasonable amount of time. It just takes time.
Like maybe one day. But yeah, it's like interesting to remember, like Waymo was founded in 2009.
Yeah.
Right. So like just as that, like it took
overnight
almost
success.
20 years to now become this overnight success. But
You mentioned robotics. I'm interested in the pools of training data that are out there. We've been joking about Scale AI. Are they going to put everyone in motion capture suits eventually to get to the humanoid data sets? There's also a lot of work being done in simulated environments. Is there a data wall that we're going to run into with humanoid robotics? How are you thinking about the data challenges in robotics generally, whether that's in the humanoid side or elsewhere? Because it feels like the humanoid narrative is taking hold. People are funding companies. It's getting big. But if it's a 16-year journey like it was with Waymo, we could be, in for a long one here.
Definitely. It's been interesting. I mean, like I do think there are a lot of really good arguments for why we'll see robotics progress accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, obviously the data is more challenging to get. It's not like you can just scrape the internet like we did with a lot of these LLMs, and the data is kind of like there and ready for the taking for at least like some of the early transformer based models. Though with an asterisk, like as we're now moving into agents, I actually think you have to be more intentional about creating different types of data. But then now with robotics too, like, you've got to figure out ways to get real world data, whether that's, internally or using somebody like a Scale, or, there's a lot of really exciting work going on in world modeling and simulation. And so, I think hopefully a combination of being really intentional about the data, both on the sort of like human collection side, and then also some of this work that we're seeing in simulation and world models, will hopefully mean that, we don't all hit this data wall, and we'll be able to sort of scale these systems more effectively. However, I mean, with robotics, it's always a little bit challenging to tell what that exact timeline is.
Yeah, be interesting. We were talking earlier about the agentic, the coding market, the AI coding market. I was kind of breaking it down to you in, is it 3 markets? Is it 2 markets? Is it synchronous work, asynchronous work? Is there a consumer, prosumer, bottom-up enterprise, top-down enterprise sales motion? How are you thinking about just AI coding generally as a market, as the businesses evolve? Just give me kind of where you're at, and then we can kind of tug on that thread in a bunch of different ways.
For sure. My favorite topic of conversation, or definitely one of my favorites, is AI code gen, near and dear to my heart. But as a disclaimer, so I'm on the board of this company, Windsurf. So agentic IDE, AI powered developer tooling platform.
Yep.
Yeah, it has been just utterly sort of shocking to me. Like, when you invest in a company, you expect like, okay, hopefully things will go well. Like, hopefully the market will be there. And I just don't think anybody, really saw this coming, just in terms of like how widespread tools like Windsurf would become.
Yeah.
And so right now, you're certainly seeing like, there's this sort of segmentation, specialization. You have tools like Windsurf and Cursor, that are, prosumer. So you've got people even with basically no coding or definitely no coding experience that are able to get up and running very quickly with these tools and really just sort of like talk to it. And it acts like this sort of programmer that will, like respond to what you want to do. Maybe it comes back, maybe it comes back with an error, but it can maybe autonomously fix that error once you kind of give it some more guidance. And, it's just been incredible seeing like, even even though I talk about windsurf all the time, my father-in-law, who I'd never mentioned it to, not a programmer, just like once he was we were just talking. He's like,
That's
"Windsurf, you
crazy.
got to go, you're VC, you got to go check out this company, Windsurf. I'm like using it to
No
like,
way.
That's
help me out at work
crazy.
and create apps. And I'm just like, wow, this is incredible.
Wow.
Just
That's
how
amazing.
widespread he's like, outside of Silicon Valley, all of that. So,
So for those types of tools, I mean, you don't have to speak about windsurf specifically, but just how much of it is just a ton of people on small consumer plans versus bottom-up enterprise adoption that gets rolled into a much larger consumption-based plan, or even like a seats-based plan? Like, how is the market for AI tooling in the enterprise evolving in terms of pricing? Because we've seen Salesforce is talking about, we want to price things not based on seats, but based on resolutions of customer service tickets. You could imagine charging someone for lines of code that get approved in pull requests, or seat-based, or usage-based, or just pure inference-based. So how is that side of the market just evolving broadly?
yeah, I mean, so what we're seeing is, there's certainly the prosumer segment for these tools, but it very quickly goes up, bottoms up into the enterprise.
Yep.
And in particular with Windsurf, I mean, from day one, we've been quite focused on the enterprise segment. And so it's, we both have a large enterprise sales team, and then these tailwinds from now all these prosumers, and then, sort of like professional developers that pick it up on their own and bring it into their company. I think pricing, it's always interesting. It's something that we constantly think about. It's a very competitive market. So, I mean, you also have to kind of pay attention to what other people are doing. I mean, per seat, easy to understand. But then, obviously a lot of these models cost money to run. And so you've got to figure out some sort of either credits or usage system. I don't think, in coding we're yet to the point where it's, let's price based on outcome. Like, oh, well, if we get this done, then you pay. Like maybe, I've seen sometimes in like customer support and things like that. But yeah, certainly having like a usage element, I think is pretty
Yeah.
important.
What's your reaction when an entrepreneur pitches you and they're like, well, we're building agents to go after this like end labor market, and the TAM is, $1 trillion, because they're just adding up like global payroll for like that type of work. Like what's your reaction to that? Is that the wrong way to think about market sizing if ultimately these are software products that can be delivered very inexpensively, which will ultimately create competition and drive maybe pricing down for that end service?
Yeah, I mean, definitely some good points. I mean, generally, I'm pretty optimistic. I think now just like kind of living through the cogen market where, just to use this as an anecdote, GitHub Copilot came out. My first kind of pessimistic reaction was just like, oh, well, this is like so useful already, and GitHub's got all these advantages. Okay, this like market's done. And they will be like, okay, every developer like uses it, and then it's kind of over. And it just the opposite of this happened. Like it turned out that there is a lot of white space in the market for teams to innovate and to create really great product experiences. Whether it's a startup, whether it's a foundation model company, and then also just like I think the market blew my mind.
What was the secret?
Yeah.
What was the secret to either the challengers to GitHub Copilot? I haven't really used them. Is it more driven by flexibility around which model you're plugging into, and GitHub Copilot kind of locking you into their model and not moving quickly enough, or is it something more on the user experience side?
So I forgot the exact date. GitHub Copilot started, I think, OpenAI only, given the sort of relationship, but it relatively quickly moved to an option. So it's certainly
you can put in Claude 3.7 Sonnet, which everyone loves.
Yes, and I think actually recently, I think I was reading this morning, but GitHub announced like, okay, for these particular features, we're going to go with Anthropic only, like particular backend features. So it's clear, like their GitHub is not locked into one model provider.
Yeah.
I think what Cursor, Windsurf, and others have done is just create different product experiences. And obviously GitHub Copilot's still doing very well, but I think what this is all has told me, and kind of back to your original question, was these markets are actually much bigger than we give them credit for. And so when I'm kind of sort of being pitched maybe a ridiculous TAM, sure, it's probably good to like verify that and really drill in on that. But I mean, we are in the world where now software can do work. And so you do have to kind of, you know, you don't just get the sort of TAM being, okay, it's the, you know, incumbent software spend. I think you have to also realize once the product gets that much better, people will want to buy more software and then also think about it as a work replacement. So you kind of get all these kind of bonus markets that, you know, TV, you know, end up being just like this huge thing.
How do you process the tension between model providers kind of figuring out if they're wanting to end the own consumer or be a platform? I mean, the most obvious example was Windsurf didn't get immediate access to Anthropic's new models, which seems, you know, I'm sure you can't comment on that specifically, or maybe you want to come in with put him in the hot seat. But yeah, it just feels like
just do it.
It feels like
It's
a
no big
very real tension that's gonna have to get resolved quickly because these are all big companies now, or at least the main players are big companies. There's billions of dollars of revenue on the line. And everybody's in a constant race to be at the edge.
You're right. I probably shouldn't say too much. I mean, what I will say, yeah, it's something that I think is going to have to be, you know, addressed in the next year or two. Like, I mean, I think it's just very clear that Cogent in particular is this market that everybody kind of wants to get into.
Yeah.
You know, I do ultimately think that, you know, I'd be shocked if in a year or two we don't see Cogent products that are both, you know, synchronous. So like assistant, you know, I can talk to it, and from the same interface, I can delegate task. I just think that is something that a lot of people are building towards. It's like there isn't a great experience today that kind of has both.
Yeah.
At least, you know, sort of a generalized both. But I mean, ultimately, like all of these companies are, I think, gonna in the sort of like even medium term come up against each other. And ultimately, what you want is sort of this distribution. And I think, you know, all these companies too are realizing you also want the model, and you want to be able to, you know, give yourself really favorable economics. So yeah, it's going to be a super exciting, even, you know, probably 6 to 12 months, I imagine.
So legal, the sort of legal AI space has been heating up. Kind of a weird, you know, interesting comp. In many ways, it felt like Cursor had like a ton of mind share, and then Windsurf just kind of exploded. People realized how quickly it was growing. At least that was my perception. And then Harvey similarly has been more in the sort of Cursor bucket, and that like tons of attention, bunch of rounds back to back. And then Legora feels like it came out of nowhere, and they raised a big Series B this week. Do you have a kind of prediction or a take on what the next category to see these sort of battles play out? I'm sure you guys already have some bets in whatever category that is. But
she's already on the board of 4 companies that are going to dominate it. She's like,
the next 4 categories.
Actually, I had to jump to the board meeting and exactly what you just said.
Yeah. You know, I'm very lucky in that, you know, I mean, even before I joined, so I've only been at Kleiner Perkins for 2 years. And even before that, a lot of my partners made really great app investments. So for example, my partner Ramon incubated Glean, which is now, you know, kind of the enterprise knowledge discovery platform in this kind of new AI era. So certainly, like, we've got a lot of apps in the portfolio. I mean, Harvey, we, you know, did their Series B. Ambience, which is a medical scribe, also in the news recently. We did their seed and Series B. So, and then, you know, we have some investments in sort of sales AI as well. I work with this company Nooks, which has started with a power dialer that people really like and is now expanding into other parts of assisting salespeople with AI. I'd say like those, you know, those categories, plus maybe add customer support, which we don't yet have kind of a generalized play in. Those are kind of like the battleground spaces. These are where it's going down right now. Like, it's clear the models work for the use cases. It's clear there's a giant prize at the end. So you've got, you know, inevitably a lot of companies competing for it. In general, especially with software, you know, I think it's basically impossible to be the only company in your category.
Can you fund a company that will just pick up the phone when I get like a robo AI call that's like trying to do some social engineering hack or whatever, and just pick up the phone and waste their time,
their time.
really inexpensively. I feel like that's
There's
what I
definitely
need.
some cybersecurity companies out there.
Yeah.
I think I've actually been pitched one. I would have to find the name, but yeah.
That's great. What do you think about competition from the hyperscalers? Obviously, Microsoft Build and Google I/O happened this week, and there's one narrative that's like, oh, so many startups are now just bullet points in a Google I/O keynote. But Ben Thompson wrote shortly after Google I/O that Google only cares about search, and they only win when it's directly impactful to search. And so you might, as a startup, not need to worry if you're doing something that's more in the labs or experimentation phase for Google, and Google is more just almost doing it as a demo of their platform, and then they really would be fine with another company just buying a bunch of TPUs on GCP and building a real company on top of their innovation. But how are you thinking about startups competing in these new AI markets with the legacy incumbents?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that I think about a lot. Just been like, obviously, somebody like Google has giant advantages, distribution, money. I mean, Google literally created the, first Transformers paper. So I mean, certainly it's something that whenever you're investing in an app company in particular, you need to, I think, at least think very deeply about what's the roadmap of all these companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. I mean, certainly seems like sort of areas in search and sort of like social and prosumer that seem like kind of the most under the microscope with these big companies. But it wouldn't shock me if they tried to compete in some of the other app categories we talked about too. So
yeah,
in general though, startups, I like to bet on startups.
Yeah, of
I
course.
think focus is important, and then I think if you move fast, if you're very strategic, there are a lot of good sort of like wedges you can sort of start with and then expand from there.
What about M&A markets in particular? I mean, my reaction to the Windsurf acquisition was, and it's going to be kind of hard for you to answer this, but was basically that like, whoa, like maybe that whole meme of like, oh, don't build a ChatGPT wrapper or whatever. Maybe that was overblown. Maybe that there's going to be a lot of app layer companies that get scooped up. Obviously, OpenAI is moving very quickly, so they're kind of early to this, but you could imagine every hyperscaler needing application layer AI companies to slot in, especially if they've had distribution and they've actually scaled revenues and they have a really great team. And it feels like, unlike in the previous era, like 2010-ish, like the hyperscalers are more sclerotic than ever. It's been 15 extra years. They're less founder mode. And so I don't know what your read is on the M&A markets broadly, but how are you thinking about the hyperscalers' approach to staying on the leading edge of these AI application layer companies?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to remember, and I have to remind myself that ChatGPT is less than 3 years old. I think. So it's like, this is happening so fast. And so when you think about like, I'm a hyperscaler and I see a market that is like, makes sense for me strategically, is it really faster for me to go and try to build it internally? Or is it faster for me to find a really great startup, perhaps with expertise that I don't have? And maybe, some other advantage, whether it's the product or the distribution or something else. And then, explore partnership conversations with them. And so, I mean, the one acquisition I can talk about is a company that I worked with at Founders Fund and still on the board of Neon is partnering with Databricks.
Cool.
And it makes sense because it's like, you've got this team of database infrastructure experts, and then you've got this company who clearly wants, their customers to be able to realize the full potential of AI agents. And so you do need, a database and memory for those agents. And so, it's certainly now, now I'm trying to think in my mind, like, oh, well, what are the other categories that hyperscalers might be looking in, and what makes the most sense for each one?
I mean, the big one to me that I'm trying to figure out is just video generation, which we had, I wouldn't call it a Ghibli moment this week, but VO3 was close. Took a little bit. It just takes a lot more work, and it's harder to get a consistent quality output. And
there isn't a single meme where everyone, like the Ghibli thing was like, just take your profile picture, take your whatever's in your camera roll, 2 words, boom, 1 shots, and you have something cool.
Yeah.
With VO3, you have to be more creative with the prompt.
Well, yeah, and the interesting thing there is it's so easy to imagine in the future where consumers are using video generation tools daily just
totally.
for fun.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, there's some like consumers just like making memes on the internet. Then there's like kind of prosumer SMB. I'm gonna make like an advertisement. And then there's the like Hollywood studio that's like, I'm gonna make a movie or independent filmmaker. But where companies kind of fit into that, I can see a world in which hyperscalers are kind of dominating. Like Meta, for example, figures out a way to get really good at video generation because it fits into the Meta ecosystem, or YouTube, with VO3. And I think that from my point of view, I can see some of these more independent foundation labs that are focused on video having to really move up market to actually dominate, because that feels like an area that like Google's not going to necessarily build the thing that creates the next blockbuster video. But if you're competing for the prosumer SMB, like feels like a really tough place to compete purely from a cost standpoint and with YouTube or Google's sort of YouTube data advantage.
Yeah. I don't know. Any reactions to VO3 this week?
Oh, I mean, super cool. And we were playing around with it. My husband's a founder, and he was like trying to make this new video for something that they're developing internally. And oh my God, just insane. So it's really cool. And I mean, I kind of agree with some of the points that have been made, but then on the flip side, I will say, like, especially in video, there's so many really great models, and they excel at a variety of different things. And so if you're like kind of a startup that is not connected to, I mean, Google obviously is developing their own models. So if you're not connected to any one of the particular models, and you can offer like kind of a best in class, like, okay, you can pick from, many of them, maybe that's an opportunity, or if you're sort of like very, very specialized. So, I mean, generally still optimistic, just kind of given at this point, there's not, in my opinion, a ton of platform risk. You've got so many of the hyperscalers and labs like that are, both closed and open source offering these types of models.
Yeah, very cool. Well, thank you so much for stopping by. We'd love to have you back. This is fantastic.
Yeah, this is great. Thanks, guys.
Super fun.
All right.
Bye.
See you later.